What became just so obvious to me so early on, how important the agent is to the brokerage. The agent is the one who's working, finding clients to work with, and then sharing those commissions with their brokerages. It was my job working at a really small company to try to help grow it, and just kind of a lack of data, lack of information, lack of systems to stay organized as the company grew. These were all kind of things that I experienced firsthand. But then understanding that there's a problem is kind of one thing. When then you want to maybe start a business around it, it also needs to be something that's possibly quite impactful or kind of financially important to the companies that you might look to serve as customers of yours. Recruiting is so closely tied to the revenue of a brokerage or retention, so important as well to the financial performance of a brokerage. That was kind of a time where I realized, okay, maybe there's actually something to explore here.
Today I'm sitting down with Sean Soderstrom, founder and CEO of Corded. Sean's path here is a little unusual. He joined Compass when there were only 10 agents. Then he helped them build out their first 40 offices outside of New York. From there, he went on to co-lead McKinsey's residential real estate practice, advising the biggest names in brokerage. And then he did something that a lot of people talk about, but few actually do. He left to build the thing that he kept seeing brokerages get wrong. Corded has become one of the leading platforms tracking agent recruiting, retention, and migration across the industry. And their research has produced some of the most quoted data in real estate right now, including the fact that nearly half the agent workforce turns over in any given year. We're going to talk about his path as a founder, what his data is actually telling us about agent migration, and where he sees the industry heading. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And if anyone couldn't tell that you have a marketing background, now they know. What a kind introduction. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, we have spent a few dinners around tables, talking about agent migration and certainly the real estate industry itself. We use your data here at EXP extensively. And what I'm curious to know is that moment that you realized that recruiting and retention was a problem that was actually a data problem, and that you wanted to try to help solve it so that we could use the data to help with the relationships.
Yeah, for sure. So as you said, I got some experience working at a brokerage kind of relatively early on in my career. And it's kind of first time in real estate, and getting to know the space. And what became just so obvious to me so early on, and this will be something that kind of anyone working in our space understands, which is how important the agent is to the brokerage, right? Mm-hmm. So the agent is the one who's going and working and finding clients to work with, and earning their commissions, and then sharing those commissions with their brokerages, right? And so in that way, kind of the agent is kind of fundamental to the brokerage. And it was my job working at a really small company to try to help grow it, and just kind of a lack of data, lack of information, lack of systems to stay organized as the company grew. These are all kind of things that I experienced firsthand. But then, kind of understanding that there is a problem is kind of one thing. I think when then you want to maybe start a business around it, it also needs to be something that's possibly quite impactful or kind of financially important to the companies that you might look to serve as customers of yours. And in that respect, recruiting is so closely tied to the revenue of a brokerage or retention, improved retention. So important as well to the financial performance of a brokerage. It's kind of a combination of those two things. It's kind of a difficult problem, and maybe one with a slightly different solution that you could imagine, as well as kind of something financially important. That was kind of a time where I realized, okay, maybe there's actually something to explore here.
So taking that leap into entrepreneurship, I mean, you came from a corporate background, a consulting background. Tell us about that leap. What was it like then to start to build the technology? Because you leaned into the technology I mean, early on, like you were sort of embracing AI before AI was cool, let's say.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so you took that leap early. What was it like to start building that platform? And was it platform first and then customers, or did you have some customers and then built the platform for the customers?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first piece was like the personal piece, right? So personally, as you say, like I'd come from a fairly structured, corporate background, kind of initially in my career, and that for me that was kind of a really good training, and I'm so happy that I did it. But then the opportunity to go work in an unstructured environment, which I think many of our realtors listening to this would kind of understand and appreciate, right? Where you have a lot of control and you can call the shots. To me, that was kind of very exciting to be able to kind of be in that type of a situation. And so I kind of got that initial taste of that working at Compass, which at the time was very much a startup. And so knew that I kind of liked that type of structure. And then the next question for myself is, well, if I go try this, I could easily fail. So am I kind of comfortable with the downside of maybe going out and trying to do something and that not working out particularly well? So that was kind of a risk that I had to get comfortable with. And I think for me personally, I realized that, and maybe this is true, maybe it isn't. If it doesn't work out, maybe I'll just go and get a job somewhere. So I kind of felt like the downside
Every
was,
entrepreneur tells themselves that, right? If it
yeah,
doesn't
you
work
kind of have to. Yeah, you kind of have to. Otherwise, you'd be too scared to ever take that type of a risk, right? And so I told myself that story. Whether or not that's true, I guess we'll have to go back and figure that out at some point in the future. But I had to do that. And then your question about where to get started. So we had this idea that, okay, recruiting, retention is important, and maybe there's kind of a data-based way that we want to try to solve that problem. And so instead of maybe starting with kind of workflow first, right, or kind of a bunch of features, what we started trying to do was actually to focus on how can we take data, like namely MLS data, and how can we re-engineer that data to kind of make sense of it. And so you're absolutely right. When we first started, actually the hot topic was crypto, right, and the blockchain and actually social networks. And we'd approach these venture capitalists saying, hey, would you like to, support us in our kind of early stages of our journey? And they were telling us like, if you're not creating the next Instagram or you're not doing the next thing on the blockchain, it's not very cool. And one of my co-founders was actually really, really focused on building predictive analytics and machine learning algorithms. Those are actually the large quantitative models, which are kind of a branch of AI. So you could say he's an AI engineer and a very experienced one. We didn't really have that term for it. And so funnily enough, like it wasn't something that got really any of the venture capital folks interested. But what we realized was you could apply this type of technology to try to forecast, let's say, an agent's future production or assess someone's potential to leave their company. And if you could do that accurately, then that would be quite valuable information for someone who, let's say, was running a brokerage or running a team or looking to recruit people into their organization at a certain type of company. And so we definitely took the concept first, but we were very confident that brokerages and teams really wanted to do recruiting. Like that was something that we kind of understood from some of our existing clients.
very true. And it's dawned on me as we're having this conversation that when we used to talk about predictive analytics, that now we would say that predictive analytics is a form of AI. We just didn't
Correct.
call it that a few years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So all of the terminologies change. Things become in vogue and things are no longer in vogue. And I think at the end of the day, like as an entrepreneur, like you kind of have to roll with all the punches. And so at the beginning, the stuff that we were doing wasn't very cool. Now it's considered more interesting, but there's kind of a cost of that. Like now everyone finds it interesting. And so a lot of people want to do the same thing that we're doing. So, you just have to kind of roll with the punches if you're going to be someone who, has the guts to keep doing at least what I do.
Yes, for sure. I want to just touch on those early days. So, like that entrepreneurial journey. And we're so close to that in the real estate industry because every broker is going through that sort of over and over again. So as you were building the company in those early days, were there any significant pivots that you had to make as you were sort of interacting with the brokers and refining what the product offering was going to look like as you were having those conversations and going to market?
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of learnings, right? Like everyone says, hindsight's 2020, right? So the initial spirit of what we wanted to do is actually very similar to what Corded does now. And then we had this future vision to better connect all of the other ancillary businesses like mortgage and title and others to the real estate industry that, all really work together, but in my opinion, like aren't as connected as they should be. And that's actually something that we're starting to do now.
Yeah.
But we actually listened, unfortunately, to some of the venture capital feedback that we got at the beginning of the journey. They said, well, listen, we'd love it if you could create the next LinkedIn. That would be really cool. That we'd fund your business if you did that. And, we probably shouldn't have listened to them, but we did. And so the first version of this was the same type of data, same type of technology, but it was really about connecting agents better with one another, in part for recruiting, but also for sending one another leads and referrals across markets and things like that. And so we started with that. We didn't solve any problem kind of like specifically enough. And none of those problems, to the point that I made a little bit ago, were kind of financially important or recurring enough that someone wanted to kind of keep coming back to the platform over and over again. We never became kind of mission critical in that kind of first stage.
Which is such a great entrepreneurial lesson, right? If you're not solving a problem, you're probably not doing the right thing.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. And I kind of think of it, again, not the cliche, but it's like the hammer looking for the nail, right? So what that often means is like, I got a cool technology. How can I use it?
Yes.
And that's often kind of not the right way to start. To your point, the right way to start, say, okay, I'm going to get really, really, really sharp on a problem. Let me go make sure that I understand this problem super deeply. Yeah. Then once I understand that problem and understand, is it persistent across a wide range of people? How severe is the problem? How financially disconcerting is this problem not being solved to the user, to the customer? Okay, now I can then start talking about solutions. And usually what you shouldn't do is ask the customer about the solution. You should ask them about the problem and just go really, really deep on that side. And then it's your job as the entrepreneur or technologist or brokerage leader in your case to present a solution back. And then a whole nother series of iterations or even small pivots occur where it's like, oh no, that's not what I had in mind. Okay, cool. And then we go back to the drawing board, come back to you. Okay. And so then basically the entire job of building technology is effectively pivots. Sometimes macro, in my case, from agent network to brokerage and team, tool. That's a big pivot. But then minor pivots in terms of we got to change these features, we got to connect these two things better, we've got to build more workflow, we got to be more end to end. We want to build an AI agent to actually do it all for you. Like all of those, you could think of as iterations or pivots, right? It's kind of slowly evolving or changing course to make sure you're actually meeting the need of the customer. And then the complicating but exciting thing is all of the technologies that you can use either in your product or technologies that you can use to build the product. Think of any of the vibe coding one might have used or any of the time that anyone listening to this has used Claude or OpenAI. Like all of these tools are evolving themselves. And so it's a very dynamic landscape that we're in. It's very exciting. It means that, we're an AI company using AI to build AI products. And then our customers are also using AI across all of the things that they're doing. And they want all of these AI tools to connect with one another. And maybe they should use an AI tool to connect all the AI tools. So there's a lot.
There's a lot of AI there.
Too much to keep up with.
At the end of that, we want to end up with a human connection and a human relationship that a human is making a decision. So let's talk about some of that, because you put out an amazing report, The State of Brokerage Recruiting and Retention. And what I find interesting is that, we still talk in the industry about recruiting and retention as two separate strategies instead of one together. Why do you think that is?
I think that one of the reasons is that sometimes it's different teams at different companies, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's the same person, and part of it is what they enjoy, and part of it is what they dislike, right? And so if you think of the like prototypical sales manager at a brokerage, often that will be. By the way, I think it's probably the hardest job in the industry because someone
Recruiting or
is,
the retention?
well, the role of the sales manager or office manager, right?
I
Because
agree. The role of
you're
the
being
sales
asked,
manager is the hardest job in the industry.
you're often kind of the COO of the office. So like all of the operations of that office and all the staff members and all of you're the CFO of the office. So you're responsible for the P&L of that place. You have a brand new agent who needs to learn how to be the real estate, do their first form or do their first deal. So you're the chief HR officer for that office as well because you're training everybody. Then you're responsible for actually improving the productivity of each of those folks. So you're the CRO of that office as well. And then you're responsible for bringing a whole bunch of agents into the company. And so you're like the head of sales.
Growth
Well, so
officer, yes. Chief revenue officer. You're the chief all of the officers.
everything, right? And often, not always, often that role will tend to have a proclivity more towards retention, coaching, training. And so that's kind of like one side of the house. And even though it's the same person, the recruitment side where you're like going out there, you may be getting rejected all of the time, that's often something that you don't want to spend as much time doing. And so I think part of it is just like what folks like and what folks don't like. And then, but as your question implies, I do think these things need to be considered kind of together, right? And the goal that I would encourage people to think about is not a headcount goal. This kind of comes from some of the research, but more of a net recruited volume goal, which encompasses both the growth side, so opening the front door, and keeping the back door closed, right? Keeping those retention numbers up.
And let's talk about that for a second because
Yeah.
one of the numbers that the report flushed out is that the average outgoing production was 2.11 million, and then the average incoming production was 1.44 million. So that was a 46% productivity gap. So to simplify that, essentially the agents leaving brokerages were taking more production with them than on average the agents you were bringing in your brokerage. Now, I call this the in and out report is how I think about this. So you're losing more production than on average you're bringing in. And I think that this is like a critical thing. I've tracked this across every brokerage that I have worked in for years. So tell me from your perspective, how to interpret these numbers, how you think about these numbers, how you work with your clients around these numbers.
Yeah, for sure. So the one of the problems, right, is if you're losing more production than you're bringing in, overall, the production of your company is going to decrease if if you have become an equal proportion company.
The math doesn't math.
No, correct. And part of that is it could be that you're losing top performers and then you're replacing them with new agents, and then those new agents aren't producing at the top performer level as soon as they come in, which is kind of obvious, right? A second could be you have really productive agents or solidly producing agents who are retiring out of the industry, and then you're replacing them with brand new agents, right? So there can be a variety of reasons, kind of structurally, why this happens. And so I think that's why I don't necessarily look at kind of headcount alone as kind of like the right
I
metric.
lost 2 and I hired 2, so I'm net even. Like that may not be a win
Right.
for your business.
Right, because headcount is not a metric that ties to the P&L, right? The sales volume, and then the GCI, and then the net contribution margin for each agent is actually what ties to the P&L. So yeah, I definitely think about the quality of agent. Now, what's interesting is there are different types of business models with respect to the economic model between the brokerage and the agent, right? So it's not necessarily that the bigger the agent, the better for the company, right?
Yes,
So
that volume might be higher, but if my company dollar is non-existent or lower, then I
yeah,
might be better off with a lower volume agent with a higher company dollar.
exactly. And so one of the really interesting analyses is to look at the profit margin per agent within the company, which is it's a fairly involved analysis. But what you end up finding, let's say on an uncapped kind of traditional split structure, where you have the higher the production of the agent, the higher the split of the agent, you end up finding this really interesting kind of like parabolic distribution of profit, which long story short means someone who doesn't produce
I love this part, Sean.
yeah. Someone who doesn't produce anything, doesn't generate any revenue for the company. And
Yeah.
what many people running brokerages need to start to understand, if they don't understand it already, is there are fixed costs associated with having agents at your company.
Right.
Even
Every
agents don't
agent has
necessarily
fixed
understand this, right? And so,
Yeah.
depending on the model, it's somewhere between $5,000 and $12,000 per agent per year. And so the idea of I'm just going to recruit someone, and if they don't produce, no sweat off my back. Well, there is actually usually between $5,000 and $12,000 coming off the P&L for that, and that's through the time that you spend coaching those folks. So that's spend in salaries. That could be space, in rent, et cetera, technologies that you're procuring for them.
Technology, that's right. Yes,
All
all those
kinds of
things.
And then
Opportunity cost, lead cost if you're giving them leads. Like there's a long list that adds up.
100%. And I actually see team leaders being a little bit guilty of this too, where I've seen a lot of folks work with a lot of team leaders who recruit to their teams, and they'll say, rather than going through an extensive interview and screening process, I have one spot on the team, I'll bring in three, and one will make it. But to your point about opportunity cost, that's a lot of time training, coaching, putting people in front of clients, only for them not to work out, 90 days later. And so it's, there's definitely costs, kind of direct and indirect, associated with that. But then to your point earlier, if someone's on a 93% split, and then there's a bunch of things that you're giving to them in terms of time, in terms of additional accommodations, often they'll also not be particularly profitable for the company. And so generally speaking, it's kind of the middle tier producers that are kind of the most profitable for the brokerages, that also sometimes don't get the most attention and love at the brokerages. So you kind of have this mismatch between who's financially most important to the brokerage, yet who does the brokerage spend the most amount of time with? Obviously, if you're going to bring in a new agent, great. You're doing a good service to the industry, because all top agents started as a agent doing their first deal at some point. But then, so they get a lot of attention because people want to coach them on how to farm and how to develop their sphere and how to do their first transaction and forms. And then the top producers get invited to the president's circle, et cetera. And it's those middle producers that are sometimes overlooked. And I'm often encouraging my customers to spend a lot of time focusing on that group within your roster, but then finding more folks like that outside of the company.
And that middle producer often contributes most to your margin. So that is an important segment to produce. Very true. So John, I want to pivot to talking about some hot topics in the industry. Okay. I mean, it has been a year. There's no shortage of headlines. Lots of mergers, consolidations happening on the brokerage side, happening on the technology side, happening on the MLS side. What's your take on what's happening in the industry right now?
Yeah, big question. So listen, I think let's start with some of the economics. It's like the most boring way to answer the question, but. So
I'm going to hot topics and you're going to economics.
Yeah, exactly. I'll get there. So brokerage profit margins have been declining for years now, right? And this is happening for a few reasons. One, the rise of teams, right? Team leads, and all power to them, right? Team leads are taking profit margin or profit pool that was traditionally associated with the brokerage, and some of that is migrated over to the team leads. You have these great splits, and there's effectively this arbitrage on split where you come in, you pay your brokerage a 10% split, but then your team member is paying you a 30% split. So there's profit pool that's kind of going towards towards a team lead, and teams are kind of growing. Many of the new brokerage models are innovating on the economic structure with the agents, and that's changing some of those economics as well. But then, of course, the maybe bigger than all of that is kind of the macro, right? So high rate environment, depressed transaction levels, and brokerages operating expenses haven't calibrated perfectly to kind of like a continually depressed market. Okay. I'll get to the more exciting part. So that's basically what's happened, right?
Yes.
So a number of brokerages haven't been performing super well financially. And as they have not been performing super well, certain other brokerages that happen to have investment or happen to be better capitalized, or maybe have always been very profit-minded such that they can be successful in a down market, have used that opportunity to effectively acquire brokerages for pretty attractive prices. And we've basically seen that, right? And so there was obviously a number of very large brokerages, we don't need to name names necessarily, that have gone through these acquisitions recently, either sold their companies or acquired other companies.
See that.
Sorry?
Do you think we'll continue to see more consolidation, more M&A activity on the brokerage side of the business throughout the year?
Yeah, for two reasons. One is well-capitalized companies will always look for deals to grow their market share. And if we're in a situation where companies that don't have as much scale or for a variety of reasons are not super profitable can be bought at good prices, more of that acquisition should happen. And with rates, as of yesterday, staying the same, but likely to increase, and transaction volume, unfortunately, going to stay depressed for a while, I would expect financial performance of brokerage to be lower. And so more companies looking to get sold, increasing in the future. Second,
how do you think that impacts, since you study the data on agent migration, how do you think that, like, we're talking at a macro level, at a brokerage level, what's happening? How do you think at the just agent migration level, are you seeing any trends on how that impacts the movement amongst agents?
Well, I think what's okay, I'll get to that in just 1 second. So just finishing that last point, the other reason that we're going to see more M&A, I think, is because if your competitor does a big acquisition and inorganically grows their market share, in order to compete, you who may not have been thinking about M&A might look to do M&A to kind of stay at parity with some of your competitors. So all of that suggests more M&A in the future. Okay, so your question is, do we expect to see any differences in agent migration? So first, I think what we are seeing is brands acquiring either individual brands or houses of brands, to use a marketing term, right? But I believe those houses of brands will continue to operate independently because they all serve a slightly different niche or segment of the market. And so we'll still measure the migration between brands. What's interesting is whether those companies put in practices that prohibit or limit agents moving between brands within their house, so to speak, right?
Which has always kind of existed anyway. They've had those written or unwritten practices amongst each other.
So if you play that to like a logical extreme, if the market only had 5 brands, then you would expect less migration, less options, right? Less alternatives. But I actually don't think that that's where the world is going. So I don't think we're moving towards the airline industry where there's, just a few number of choices for you in terms of domestic travel in the US. For every acquisition, you end up seeing kind of a proliferation of newer companies popping up, often led by the people at the company who were acquired. So it's kind of interesting that sometimes are the same people. So the top 100 brands in the US account for 59% of the market, which is actually not a whole lot Basically, that says there's a long tail of small companies, and I think anyone working in real estate would say the consumer is typically choosing to work with the agent before they choose to work with the brand. The brand might mean something. The brand might establish some credibility, but the way that that is expressed in data that I can see is most of the clients follow the agent wherever they work, right? And so that's the reason why I would say kind of the agent is the one who's chosen first. And so I actually do think that only the top 100 brands only accounting for 59% of the market. That's the sign of a healthy, functioning market in terms of kind of the brokerage dynamics. And you're seeing the barrier to entry to start a brokerage is fairly low. And so if you wanted to start a brokerage with your sister, kind of in the town that you live in, you could probably go do that, right? And it's not that hard to go do that. And a lot of people do, in fact, do that. And so whether that company ends up getting acquired, I don't know. Maybe more likely in this type of market than another. But I do think that we'll continue to see kind of a flourishing of the smaller companies, kind of meeting the local needs of any one area. So I don't think we're racing towards kind of a 5-brand end state. I think it's kind of this accordion. If you look kind of over time, it's like you see some consolidation and then it kind of goes back out and then it comes back together. So we're in a moment now where it does feel like there's more consolidation coming. I would expect that over kind of the near term. But I think if you look at any one local market, you will see kind of new upstarts coming up, trying to solve the local needs of those communities.
Very interesting. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Sean. We could continue on, but tell everyone how they can reach you and how they can get in touch with Courted.
Oh, thanks so much. I really appreciated the conversation. I think the easiest thing is to come to our website. It's Courted, COURTED.io.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Wendy. Talk to you soon.